Section 3 of The Diary of a Russian Lady. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Shrimpfish. The Diary of a Russian Lady by Barbara Doukhovsky. My first appearance in society. I was to be taken out in St. Petersburg for my first season, and presented at court. How my heart palpitated at the idea of my first dance! I made my appearance in public in Kharkov, at a ball given by the Count Sievers, the governor of the town. I am not afflicted with shyness. Nevertheless, I was seized with a sudden access of bashfulness on entering the ballroom, and, feeling horribly uncomfortable with the big bouquet that my brother had given to me, I flung it on the floor in the anteroom. It was not long, however, before I was quite at my ease again, enjoying the ball enormously, and dancing to my heart's content all through the evening. I came to St. Petersburg full of happy hopes and expectations, and an eager desire to spread my wings in the wide world. It would be a delightful existence, every hour filled with enjoyment. I plunged at once into all the gaieties of St. Petersburg society. Everything was so new and delightful to me. My first social appearance was at a great court ball. I was brought out by my aunt, the Princess Kurakin, a lady of honor to the Empress. I had such a ravishing ball dress, with a very long train. One of Mamma's friends had lent me a carved ivory fan of great value, which I dropped in the snow stepping out of the carriage. The fan lost some of its luster, but what a dazzling luster presented itself to my eyes when I entered the palace and mounted the splendid staircase lined with powdered footmen in gorgeous liveries. Everything was magnificent, and I enjoyed the ball madly. I was not acquainted with a single soul in the place. Nevertheless, I became instantly surrounded by a circle of partners. I never amused myself so much before. The first dance over, my cavalier, a brilliant officer of the guards, piloted me through the ranks of dancers to the refreshment room to get an ice. As we passed by the Emperor, who was engaged in a conversation with my Aunt Kurakin, His Majesty gazed at me fixedly and asked who I was. My aunt came over and led me to the Emperor and formally introduced me. His Majesty began by questioning me about myself, my home, and my parents. I forgot to be frightened and answered without the slightest flutter of embarrassment, and we soon fell into a comfortable talk. The Emperor asked me if it was my first grown-up dance. "Oh, no, sir, it's my second one," I announced proudly. The Emperor smiled and expressed his desire to see me henceforth at the court balls. Perceiving my partner, who was trying to conceal himself behind a column, the Emperor asked me if it was my cavalier. "Oh, yes, sir, and I am keeping him waiting such a long, long time," I blurted out in one breath. It was indeed a dreadful breach of court etiquette, but I was so inexperienced in the ways of society that a transgression against court laws appeared of little importance to me. The Emperor seemed much amused by my outspoken manner, and said, "Well, go on dancing. I will not deprive you any longer of that pleasure." I returned home enchanted, and went to bed in a delirium, but I had had too exciting a night to find it easy to fall asleep. Some days later, at a musical party given by my uncle, the Prince Prosorovsky Galitzin, the master of the house, said to me significantly, "Well, Vava, I congratulate you." But he did not conclude his phrase, for Mamma, who tried to preserve me from the intoxication of overpraise, made haste to change the subject of conversation. I was tortured with curiosity, and got the whole story out of my cousins, the Prosorovskys, who told me that the Emperor at the fox hunt had asked their father all about me, and said a lot of flattering things, congratulating him on having such a niece. The gaiety and bustle of St. Petersburg life bewildered me. I went out a great deal, fluttering from amusement to amusement, balls, dinners, theatres, concerts, etc., etc. Unfortunately, I couldn't be in two places at the same time. Papa took me to another court ball, where I distinguished myself, making such a stupid blunder. Overheated by dancing, I was dying of thirst, and rushing up to a smart-looking individual, clad in bright red, I told him to bring me some iced lemonade, taking him for a court official. He returned in about 5 minutes, closely followed by another personage arrayed, likewise, in red, who carried a tray, and making me a most refined bow, he named himself Senator K. In an instant I had guessed the whole odious situation. I had made an awful mistake, having confounded a red-livered lackey with a senator. How could I have been so clumsy? It was a horribly awkward moment, and I thought I should die of shame. It was really very difficult to find something to say. Covered with confusion, I blushed all over my face, and muttered hastily some excuses, wanting the floor to open and swallow me up. There was to be a grand fancy dress ball at court, in which I was invited to participate. It was to be one of the best things of the season, one of the 8 marvels of the world. The Grand Duke Waldemar, representing the sun, was to open the cortege, sitting in a triumphal car drawn by pages and surrounded by 12 sunbeams. I was designed to represent one of them. We were to follow the car in a semicircle, the tall ones, I being one of the number, in the middle. I had the most bewitching costume that heart of girl could desire. It consisted of a Greek tunic in rose satin, draped on the shoulders with golden gauze, a small sundial on the top of my coiffure, powdered with golden powder, was to indicate the hour. Mine pointed out 6 o'clock. My costume was quite ready, and I gazed at myself in the looking-glass with rapture, arrayed in it. I was a good deal excited about this ball, and could think of nothing else, when suddenly came the tidings of the death of a prince belonging to the Prussian imperial family, and the ball was put off. I was awfully disappointed, and nearly cried my eyes out. I had looked forward to it so. A love affair sprang up between me and the Prince of Montenegro, brother of the reigning prince of that country. We met for the first time at a ball at the French embassy. The prince was astonishingly handsome, quite a show creature, looking very picturesque in his native costume, consisting of a white woolen skirt and a jacket with golden embroidery. There was an air of veni vidi vici about him. The prince was made much of in society. Never was a man so run after. I was surrounded by a flood of partners when the prince came up, claiming a dance, but I had to refuse him, being already engaged. He was by no means discouraged, and established himself on the other side of my chair, and thus I found myself sitting between 2 devoted cavaliers. The prince danced divinely, and I waltzed with him pretty nearly all the evening. As the ball went on, Mamma, who found that my partners were becoming alarmingly enterprising, wanted to carry me off home at once, but a chorus of protestations arose from them, and I, too, began to implore Mamma not to be obliged to leave the ball just when the fun was at its height. The prince added his entreaties to mine and gained the victory, taking me to supper. I never had a more entertaining neighbor. The prince had lived a great many years in Paris, and spoke French perfectly. He was so clever, full of spirits and daring. In short, he was a number of charming things, and I lost my heart a bit. The temptation to play with fire had seized me, and I desired to prove my power to charm him. The prince lost no time in letting me see the impression I had made on him, and though he had the reputation of preferring the society of married women to that of young girls, I saw that he was inclined to enter into a flirtation with me. The champagne had warmed him up, and he became very audacious. He slipped his hand under the tablecloth, and our fingers touched, and communicated fire. Meanwhile, a not very attractive damsel, deeply impressed by the prince's good looks, was gazing at him with eyes of passionate adoration across the table. I noticed it to the prince, but he replied that as for himself he had no eyes for anyone but me, and he had indeed very expressive eyes, the prince, and knew how to use them. I tried to keep a cool head during the siege of my admirer, but though I had been an iceberg, it was impossible for me not to thaw in his presence. My pulses quickened, and I felt an odd little thrill of emotion, while my telltale eyes betrayed the truth and looked pleased. After the cotillon, Mamma took me reluctantly away. Whilst we were putting on our cloaks in the ante-room, The prince appeared and came out in the cold to help us into our carriage, and pressing my hand to his lips, he begged permission to call on us the next day. I was playing the piano frantically, absorbed in my performance of one of Chopin's nocturnes, when the prince was announced, but Mamma being out, I gave orders to tell him that there was nobody at home. The prince was a good deal nettled, and when I met him at a ball a few days afterwards, he greeted me somewhat chillingly, but I soon smoothed him down and we were good friends again. The prince's marked attention to me soon became the topic of much gossip. He was hit, I knew he was, and I, too, was not very far from being in love with him. At the end of the season the prince's white skirt began to be slightly grizzly, and as I had remarkably sharp eyes and a tongue to match, I looked him over critically and declared that I would not dance with him until he had changed his skirt for a new one. Brazen girl that I was to say such shameless things. We left St. Petersburg in February, and came to Moscow for a few days to my grandmother Galitzine. I caught a bad cold on the way, and a doctor was hastily summoned, a fat little old man, with a face like a wrinkled apple. He was so funny that I had an attack of laughter at the sight of him, which he took for delirium. I had been allowed on that day to have my friend Mary Grekoff with me for an hour or two. She sat on the edge of my bed, and we were both soon engaged in eating pounds of chocolate, which did not improve the state of my health, to be sure. Small wonder then that I got worse with every minute. My temperature rose alarmingly, and I began to be delirious. My illness declared itself plainly. Typhoid fever was the verdict pronounced by the doctor. The case was going to be an anxious one, and the chances were 2 to 1 against my recovery. The doctor said it would be well that Mamma, who was almost distracted with anxiety and grief, should be prepared for the worst. I passed many sleepless nights tossing in my bed in a restless manner. At daybreak, when the windows were beginning to whiten, I listened with envy to the joyous cocerico of neighboring cocks, who woke up gay and brisk after a good sleep, whilst I, poor thing, had not closed my eyes for many nights. I sat up in bed, propped with pillows, and sobbed bitterly, moved to pity for myself. I was so unused to illness. Mamma, who slept in my room, came and sat by me, and we had our cry together. Feeling my end drawing nigh, I sent for a priest and received the Holy Sacrament. Soon after came the crisis. I suffered tortures that day. One could hear my shrieks 2 streets off. Gasping for breath, I tried to bounce out of bed and had to be kept there by main force. Happily, complications did not arise. My constitution triumphed, and by the mercy of heaven, life conquered death, and I was pronounced out of danger. My convalescence was slow. I was laid up for 6 long weeks, coming round from my illness day by day, and nursed with much tenderness. As soon as all danger was over, the doctor permitted me to be transferred to Doljik, though I was still weaker than a new-born babe, a mere shadow of my former self. The wholesome country air put me quite on my legs again. My health was entirely restored, and I recovered my good looks and my spirits. But I had such a shock when I found all my hair had to come off. I was obliged to have it shaved after my illness. It did not hinder me, however, from having 3 or 4 admirers here, waiting on my every words. One of my chief victims was Aksenov, a chum of my brother's, who is completing his studies at the University of Kharkov that year. Aksenov was not a bit the hero of my girlish dreams, and had no chance whatever of attracting me. He was a clumsy, athletic-looking lad, with feet like fiddle cases, rough on the outside, but the best fellow in the world. He improved on close acquaintance. One could easily see that he was falling seriously in love with me, in spite of my shaven head, covered, it is true, with a coquettish cap which suited me wonderfully. I seemed to him a pearl beyond price, and he spent all his time in gazing up at me as an unattainable star. He was my devoted slave in everything, following me about with a sort of dog-like fidelity. I could twist that giant round my little finger. He was as wax in my hands, and would go through fire and water for my sake. But I was a very cruel girl. I delighted to torment my admirers, and I only made a laughing-stock of Aksenov, and began to order him about mercilessly. Enjoying to impress my sweet will upon the poor boy, I teased and tormented him atrociously. Had I not had plenty of victims already? Why should I want that poor boy to be tortured? But my desire for conquest was insatiable. I couldn't leave a man alone. We had a continual succession of guests in our house. In the middle of May there was a large party staying at Dolgic Castle, and Aksionov was kept by me as usual in the background. He accompanied us in our excursions, carrying cloaks and umbrellas. I used him barbarously, and abused my power over him. I was pitiless, making the most use possible of my willing slave, and invented many nasty tricks to annoy him. When we arranged dances in the evenings, I sent him to gather roses in the garden, promising him, with my most winning smile, a waltz in recompense, whilst another partner carried me off in his arms from under his nose, leaving him standing there in great dismay. My simple-hearted lover had no suspicion that I was only fooling him. He went and picked the roses, and when he returned with an armful of flowers, I started him out again on the same errand, and the much-enduring Aksionov went off, crestfallen, with a face a yard long. One must allow, poor boy, that just then he happened to be supremely unattractive. When he came back this time, I flung off his roses and said with my most princess-like air, dropping into an armchair, that I was too tired to dance with him now. Seeing the look of suffering in his face, I thought that I had teased him enough for that evening, and coaxed him with some sweet words. Poor Aksionov only heaved a sigh like a March gale, and looked at me with kind, forgiving eyes. He told me one day that the lines of his hand predicted him a short life, and his prediction was realized. Soon after we heard of his death in Kharkov of smallpox. End of section 3.